I'm Raburn, Howland. I worked with Center for Political Studies for 20 some odd years. The entire time Phil was there. And this is going to be tough. I first met Phil in 1961 when I came here as an NDEA scholar in the old American Political Behavior Program. And Phil probably was the best teacher I ever had. He couldn't beat him. In a word, he was brilliant. Early on, I was introduced to one of his many passions, which Rob has just talked about, the con game and the baseball seminar. And those late night collections where Phil would skewer us on our lack of statistics and our idiocy for supporting all Boston Red Sox or any other combination of that. And he proved it by always winning. As Rob has mentioned already, he loved the myriad of data that it produced. Competing against him in the con game and the baseball seminar was a truly humbling experience. But wonderfully enlightening. He would have what we called special seminars, which Rob has talked about. And we could get in to see Phil when virtually nobody else get past that door. And I can still remember people sort of looking at us going, why them and not me? Little did I realize how important that relationship to baseball would be to me in a few years. I left Michigan in 1964 to continue my career as a U.S. Foreign Service officer in Colombia. It was a job I really loved and I was proud of as a kid who went to a public high school in Ohio. After a tour of duty representing my country in Colombia, I returned to Washington in the harsh reality of the nightmare that was the Vietnam War. My next assignment was an assignment as a psychological operations advisor to the military in Vietnam. I learned while I was in training how much worse the nightmare was going to become. During this time, I was able to track Phil down one day while he was in Washington at a professional meeting of some sort, probably APSA. This was the summer of 1967. I'd been out of touch with Phil and the Michigan and baseball for a couple years, serving in Bogota, Colombia, and needed a baseball fix badly. He was more than happy to comply. After talking about Michigan and baseball for a while, he asked me about my next assignment and what it entailed. What transpired was one of the most important conversations I ever had. It also exposed to me a side of Phil that I don't think many people had the great good fortune to see or experience, because he was always such a private person. As we talked, his innate curiosity and ability to ask really probing questions became clear. Lots of graduate students out here know about that probing ability. Excuse me. I witnessed his wonderful humaneness, his caring nature, and his capacity for indignation. He really cared about what I was struggling with as I tried to sort out what I was going to do with my life. He asked about my family. They had to go either to the Philippines or stay in the States. He asked about what I was going to be able to use my training that I'd spent 3 years at ISR getting. The answer was no. I told him about my efforts to get this assignment changed to the research division of USAID so I could at least use some of these skills, and how I had run into a classic bureaucratic Washington double talk stone wall. I related to Phil what my former boss from Columbia had told me was the real reason I wouldn't get into the research division. He said the simple truth was that the powers that be did not want anybody in that division who would be knowledgeable enough about research methods, et cetera, to challenge the policy line that had already been decided upon. They weren't interested in data or ideas. You can imagine Phil's reaction to this. He was visibly appalled, and his response was classic. And if you've ever heard him say, and Gene knows this, that's awful, because Gene can say it exactly the way he could say it. In retrospect, it was one of the strongest reactions I ever saw him have to anything. Phil never used an expletive that I ever heard. After we had talked a little while longer about other things that I might do, Phil leaned back in his chair and asked me, "Have you ever thought about going back to Michigan, Raburn?" I said no, I hadn't, because I knew I wasn't cut out to be the kind of academic that he was training, and I still hoped to salvage my foreign service career. He then asked me if I would mind if he told Warren about our conversation. Hang in there with me. I had no idea what he had in mind, but I also knew that Warren had a myriad of connections and that he might be able to suggest options for me. So I said, yeah, that was fine with me. We talked a little while longer, and I headed back to my language training classes. About a week later, I got a phone call from Warren that would change my life forever. After exchanging some small talk, Warren mentioned that he and Phil had been talking about my situation. They wondered whether I might be interested in coming back to Michigan and helping Warren run the consortium. The rest is history, as they say. My family was ecstatic. I was immensely relieved, only saddened by the fact I had to end foreign service career. I came back to Michigan in March of 1968 and have been with Michigan ever since. I retired 2 years ago after 45 years. Little did we know at the time that Phil was, in effect, helping to hire the individual who would serve as his assistant director in CPS when he became director in 1982, I believe it was, when he succeeded Warren as director of CPS. Thus began a long and rewarding career with Phil in a variety of roles at ISR. I was fortunate to be able to appreciate the many facets of his wonderful and humane personality that I don't think many people ever saw. I witnessed his unquestioned integrity, his deeply held sense of fairness for everyone, and his marvelous caring nature that had been so important to me personally. He taught me a great deal about dealing with difficult people and difficult situations. I enjoyed his quick wit and sense of humor, because that's the only way you can handle some of those things. I also watched his capacity to listen, which was amazing, his patience, and his willing to put himself in another person's shoes. They were all valuable lessons from the master teacher. In the final analysis, Phil was a brilliant scholar and teacher. He was a remarkable human being who touched many lives during his illustrious career. I am eternally grateful to him for the difference he made in my life. It was an honor and a privilege to have known and worked with him for so many years. He was truly a wonderful, remarkable human being.